So as I mentioned, we've got FIREA Title 11, which was put into place in the very late 80s, 1989, and really was implemented between 1989 and let's call it 1994, when the interagency body put into place the first appraisal guidelines. Underneath FIREA, we've got each primary federal regulator has their own appraisal regulation. And then the interagency group got together and issued this supervisory guidance. So you may have heard that in December of 2010, the interagency body came together, revised their guidance. And one of the interesting things about that, oftentimes I think there's a misnomer that the December 10 revised guidelines came out of Dodd-Frank, and in reality, the revised guidelines were published in proposed form as early as 2008, so 2 years before Dodd-Frank was passed. There's language within the guidelines themselves that recognizes that there very well may be future revisions within the next couple of years as rules under Dodd-Frank get written. There may be a need for those guidelines, and actually the actual regulation, the level above that, to be amended over the next 6 months, year, 2 years. The Federal Truth in Lending Act also comes into play, and here's where we get the overall statute, which was TILA Section 129E, which was added by Dodd-Frank. Underneath that, we also had an addition to the Federal Reserve Board's Regulation Z, which is a relatively famous implementing regulation for the Federal Truth in Lending Act. Part 22642 was added to Regulation Z in the form of an interim final rule, which you also may have heard about. That was the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve Board tasked in Dodd-Frank with putting that rule into place within 90 days. So it went into place relatively rushed and in interim form, which means it was published without public comment. And we'll talk later about some instances where the board published it, it's effective, it's law, but also they asked for public comment on certain situations. And obviously they'll revisit that, although we don't expect it to be in 2012, because the interagency body also has other rules to write. Remember the super appraisal requirements that we talked about with deadlines at the end of this year. So we don't think that the interim final rule will be revisited this year.